All right. Welcome, everybody. It's Trial Review Tuesday. Welcome to our live event. If y'all can let us know if you can see everything and hear everything good, that will be helpful. We can see your comments pop up here on the screen. And then we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. I guess by way of chit chat, I'll say we recorded just today and posted just today a podcast about Jen's weekend and the Longines. Did I get it right? Longines show that she took part of. So I thought that had a lot of interesting stuff in it for all of our podcast fans out there.
All right, I know there was a lot of questions from the videos and photos I had posted over the weekend. So if you were one of those people going, what are you doing? Now you have answers.
That's right. That's right. All right. I am seeing comments from people on YouTube. I'm not seeing anything from Facebook yet. There we go. There we go. All right. Now we got people. It popped up here. Yay. Okay. Well, then I think we can go ahead and get started. Someone's going to go take care of the one dog we thought would be fine and an X-Pin. That's true. Thunder. I didn't think about that part. But we'll go ahead and get started here because we have each chosen a trial video to do a live analysis of and kind of look at some elements, let you see how we analyze video, how we make suggestions as instructors. Oh. Hey, buddy. It's a thunderstorm here, so this guy is not feeling that. There you go. All right, so we each chose one, and we're each going to go through our video. And of course, you can also ask questions. So if there's anything that you want to us to expound upon, let us know. Somebody asked, how do we make it larger? And I guess I would say wherever you're watching it, if you can just open. I'm hearing like barking from somewhere. If you just open your window and maximize, that would be great. Can you check your computer? I think I'm hearing barking from your computer.
I'm like, it's not on my end.
Am I? Okay. I thought I was going crazy for a second. Okay. So yeah, to make it larger, I would just go full screen, and that will probably give you the best experience. If you happen to be out and you're just on your phone or whatever, and you don't have a large screen, you can probably follow along for the most part. We can zoom in to these runs. So we'll be zooming in to certain spots, but you can also catch the replay. Not a problem at all. Okay. So I'm going to start with this run from Rebecca. This is a jumper's run. And there were a couple of interesting things that happened. First of all, we also have pulls to deal with. So I know quite a few people have to deal with pulls when they are running. And so we're just going to kind of scroll through here and let you see what happens. We have 1, 2, 3 behind the pull. The handler's running forward, and we can see the dog taking a hard look. Sorry, let me get my arrow. Taking a hard look this way at this moment. And then checking in with the handler. But we have a bypass of this jump. So the dog was supposed to take this jump right here. The handler here takes a moment to try and recover before getting the dog over the jump. So it looks like what Rebecca wanted to do here is a landing side rear cross. So she wanted to run here and then turn the dog away from her on the flat on the way to this jump. And so the first thing that I want to point out is that as she's running across, her shoulders are really strongly pointed in this direction. And with the presence of this off course, I think that you have to be really careful about your shoulders in this situation. So yes, we want to, keep our eyes on our dogs, but when your shoulders are pointed out here, it's going to have the dog looking out here. And the thing is that when the dog is looking at this jump here, when that's the line that they're on, it's not just this off course that you have to worry about. As soon as your dog realizes it's not this jump, the actual next option is backside of this jump before the dog actually decides to take the front side. So your dog has 2 options before the correct option of taking this jump. And so I think that if we're going to do this landing side front, landing side rear out here, we have to really be conscious of keeping our dogs, keeping our line straight, having our dog really think of this as a straight line through this, this half box here before we can think about putting the pressure on the line. You can't put the pressure too early in this situation. But what I would say is I would question making this a landing side rear at all. And instead, I would put the rear cross between this jump and this jump. And in that case, we don't want to be quite so far ahead. We actually want to kind of be even with the dog as the dog is taking this jump. So that might even mean that you could go with dog a little bit here with a little bit of decel to create this turn. Now, because you've created a nice turn here, you can kind of go together here. And then as the dog is headed towards this jump, that's where we put the pressure on the line to create this turn. Now, there is a significant amount of distance between these two jumps. And so I do kind of understand the impulse to do the landing side rear here, because it does feel like there's the possibility that if we do the rear cross here, that we get this turn and we miss this jump. It's kind of far out there. So if we do this rear cross, we have to get the dog committed, cut behind, and really accelerate towards this wing to get this jump. I think the bigger the dog, the less of an issue this is of coming in the gap. The smaller the dog, the more that could be a problem. But I also wonder with this handler, if she really could have actually made a blind cross in here in between this jump and this jump. With there being like so little of a turn, it's a really good opportunity. And I'm kind of laughing at myself here because I know Jen's analysis is going to touch on a lot of these same things. I didn't realize quite how.
I was thinking the same thing as you were talking. I was like, I think I'll be touching on this.
Right. This is one part. There's another part at the end of the thing, but I think, but I wanted to point out this first one because we get the off course there. Now we get the turn away. And then from here, here's one interesting part where the dog is clean, but we could clean this up and be a little bit more clear with the dog. And that's this pinwheel. So first of all, even in the absence of this tunnel, I think that the way that we like to recommend pinwheels is instead of the handler just rotating in the middle and the dog rotating around, is we want to try and create a series of lines. And to do that, we need to create, as the handlers, a series of lines. So what that might look like is a little run, a little stop. That creates the turn. A run, a stop. That creates this turn. And then we can run it out to the next part of the course. So we get a much clearer response from our dogs when we have those little pace changes, the little bit of running and then the deceleration. And it makes a pinwheel much more clear than the handler just kind of pivoting in place and the dog kind of left to their own devices to find whatever is in their arc. And then in this case, it's doubly important because one thing that is in the dog's arc is this tunnel. And so you see that the handler has to use a pretty big call off here, clapping and calling the dog's name because the dog was really headed towards this tunnel. And I think if you have like a sharp change of direction instead of a gentle arc, then you're more likely to get a better response on the pinwheel from your dog. Here we have a nice rear cross, commit the dog, cross behind. And then the other part that I wanted to look at is at the end. We did have a pop out of the weave poles. All right, here, this is an interesting rear. I think this basically works because it's a tunnel. So you basically just think of this as committing the dog super early to the tunnel with the verbal, which I think she does here. She's giving that tunnel, well, like even before the dog takes off, she's saying tunnel, tunnel, tunnel. And then basically your rear cross is kind of, it's almost doesn't matter. The dog has been committed to the tunnel and then the cross is done before they ever get out of the tunnel. You can almost think of this cross technically as creating this turn, the turn of the tunnel. But now here we have another rear cross. And again, it's the landing side rear cross. And I think this is the one I wanted to really, really look at because I think it illustrates the downside of landing side crosses. So what I mean by landing side cross is in a typical rear cross, we would say you commit the dog to an obstacle and then you cross behind while they're engaged with the obstacle. The landing side cross, here we go. The landing side cross says, I'm going to let you take the obstacle and then I'm going to turn you away on the flat. And the problem with doing a landing side cross is the dog has no idea what is coming up next. We always want our dogs to know where they're going next before they take an obstacle, because how you take this jump if you're going here and how you take this jump when you're going here should be completely different jumping efforts and angles of approach and everything from the dog's point of view. But when you wait until landing to tell them where to go, they don't have any of that information. And you see it really clearly here. The dog takes this jump this way, looking this way, when the correct obstacle is actually over here. So they're looking 180 degrees in the wrong direction because of the landing side rear. Now you get the turn and you get the side change, but you get a much longer time, a longer, it takes time. You get a wider turn when you do it that way. And it also takes a lot longer for the handler to catch up. Here, that doesn't matter because it's the end of the course. But if this were the middle of the course, you can see that the handler is here when the dog's here. And I would estimate that if we put the rear cross between these jumps, the handler should be here as the dog is landing and then running this way. So maybe the dog is here and the handler is way up here. So imagine how much of an advantage that would be if this was not the final jump of the course. And so how do we do that? How do we accomplish that rear cross? And this one, I don't think we have the same problem as the other one where there's some value to the landing side for missing the next jump. This one is set up perfectly for a traditional rear, but what you have to do is you need to get in tight as the handler to this jump. So that's fine. They're in the tunnel. You have all the time in the world. So instead of getting up ahead, you would get closer to the jump. So you have less distance to travel on your rear cross. I would put some decel here because there is a turn here, right? If you look at the angle from the tunnel, the dogs are jumping this way. There's a pretty significant turn back to this jump. So I would put a decel here so that the dog on approach should already be preparing to turn in this direction. So we don't quite get this. We get a little bit more like this. And then as the dog lands, we go up together, just enough to commit the dog to the jump. And as the dog commits, I put pressure on the line. And what you should see is the dog's head is going to turn to the left before they even take off or as they're over the bar. And ideally, you see the dog hugging this upright as opposed to being on this half of the jump. So you get a more efficient path and they know where they're going ahead of time. And then as the handler catches up, you just finish out with the final jump. So basically, there's those two spots. And with both of those, I would eliminate the landing side rear. And with the first one, I think you could make an argument for that blind cross. All right. Any other, oh, sorry. Okay. And now I'm looking at all of the things here. Any questions on this particular run, this particular handling, anything that you wanted to add, Esteban or Jen or anything? I will give it just a moment here and then we will proceed on to the next.
I think my analysis will build nicely off of what you just talked about
Yes.
and kind of go together. So it might be one of those things where we have stuff to add or people have questions after mine as well. So
yeah, perfect.
Those of you watching, you can ask any questions about anybody's feedbacks at any point. So if after mine, that triggers a question for Sarah, feel free. But now's a good time if you have anything on that one.
Perfect. So for Jennifer's, just because of technology, she can't like actually do the software live. So she has pre-recorded hers. I'm going to play that for you. And then we also have that loaded in my iPad. So if there's any further questions, I can always bring it back up and go to whatever whatever element there is. There was one question here. How do you feel post affects dogs, especially small ones? Jen, you trial a lot with posts, right?
Yes, this facility is actually one at which I trial out a fair amount, and I'm entered in a couple weekends. And the poles definitely can affect the dogs. I do tend to find that they affect the handlers way more than they affect the dogs. Typically, the way that I see them affect the dogs is sometimes misjudging takeoffs and like thinking of it as part of the wing. Like if you go in this video back to like the third jump, you can actually see the dog like kind of takes off real big, right? Like you can watch right here, like see how early that dog's taking off. The first thing that came to mind is I felt that the pole made it harder for the dog to judge what was the jump and what was the pole, like where was the bar and where was the wing, where is the pole. But that tends to be one of the only things that I see them to affect the dogs. But they tend to affect the handlers, and it's I always just try to think about it, because you do see a lot of judges who will do what's on the screen where they build the wing at the pole, or they'll put a tunnel around the pole. And I always just think of them as like big wings. They're just tall wings. They're not any wider. They're not any less visible than a lot of wings. I just think of them as tall wings. So in my experience, because my facility also has 2 poles, this place has 3. So it's a little bit harder for course design. But I think that the biggest restriction is the judging, right? It's very hard for the judges to design courses. The second factor is the handlers, and the handlers often feeling like they're in their way and they're not sure if they should layer or not. But the third thing is affecting the dogs. I don't tend to find that it affects the dogs nearly as much as people worry about.
Right. And I think my advice or my strategy would be to first walk the course and make your plan as if there are no poles, and see if it's, see if it's feasible, see if it's a problem, right? Like try and, forget about the poles and handle as if they're not there, and see if that works. And then if any of them are in a place where you feel like it's where you would naturally want to be, then you have to make some adjustments. But I think, like you said, the way it's built, where it's kind of in the space of the wing where you're not going to run anyway, I think it's less of an issue.
Yeah, some judges are a little bit better about their course design around poles than others.
Right. Okay, so now I'm going to play Jennifer's
trial review Tuesday analysis. I picked a run that I thought gave us 2 different aspects of the sport to talk about, and that is looking at strategy and execution. Now, this handler did not ask any specific questions about their videos or give any feedback. They just kind of sent the run in and said, here you go. So what we're going to do is we're going to first take a look at the execution. Now, what I mean by execution is saying within each skill that was used, was it done well? If you chose a blind, was the blind done in the correct location? Was the timing of it good? With the rear, did they do it in a timely manner? Was the position of it good? It's saying, given what the handler presented, was the execution appropriate? But then we're also going to come back through and we're going to look at strategy. That's where we're going to kind of say, given the team, so the dog and handler, both people are going to take, both parties are going to be taken into account. Did they make strategic choices that made sense for that run? So since we're going to start with execution and just kind of looking at what she did, I'm going to go ahead and play it through up to where we see the fault. All right, so we see the start of the run here, tunnel start, a little bit of opposition reflex, which I love. All right, so we're going to do a blind after 2, go around this pinwheel, all dog on right, come around kind of another little pinwheel here. All right, and then now we're going up to where we're going to see the fault with the rear on the flat, followed by a refusal right there. Okay, so the only mistake that happens on this course is this refusal right here. So I'm going to go back a little bit, and I'm going to come back all the way to about here, because this is where things start, and we'll go ahead and play it in slow-mo for you to take a closer look. So this is obstacle number 8. All right, you can see Katie's ahead of Ollie coming over 9. You actually can see here that Ollie is eyeballing this off-course jump and jumping on a trajectory towards that off-course. That's going to come back into play when we talk a little bit about strategy. All right, she gets his head, and then now we see the rear on the flat. Ollie gets ahead and curls in and sets that line right past the jump, despite Katie's best efforts to bring up that outside arm, and we see the refusal. All right, so if we say, okay, this is the strategy, this is what is happening, I'm going to commit to this plan, then let's talk about the execution of this. So the skill that's being done here is a rear cross on the flat. Now, the difference between a rear cross at the jump and a rear cross on the flat is the timing of when the rear cross occurs. For a rear cross at the jump, basically the lead change is happening on approach to the jump. And you could almost kind of say the lead change happens as the dog is jumping. So that's why I say it's a rear cross at the jump. The dog will take off for the jump on one side of the handler's body, and then by the time they land, they're on the new side. So the rear cross, the side change, and the jump are happening at the same time. But here we see a rear cross on the flat. This will kind of a lot of times be referred to as a landing side rear cross. Basically, you're doing it as an independent element, right? So this jump is done. We complete that jump, dog on right. Okay, we perform the rear cross on the flat between two obstacles, and by the time the dog takes off for the next jump, the side change is done and dog is on the new side. The advantages to a rear cross on the flat is that it eliminates any jumping component. Okay, so you're kind of separating the elements. A lot of people who worry about knocked bars will do rear crosses on the flat. A lot of times when people need to keep enough forward motion to motivate a dog to come to the landing side of the jump, they're ahead. We can see that here. They'll do a rear cross on the flat. All right. However, the downsides to a rear cross on the flat is that it will create a natural shape. So it's not always presenting the straight line from point A to point B. So instead of getting this path, you tend to get the straight out, okay, turn on the, oops, wrong little label there, straight out, turn on the flat. So a rear on the flat tends to be significantly less efficient with regard to the strides and the yardage that the dog is taking. It also doesn't tell the dog about the turn until after they land. So instead of taking off for this purple jump, already knowing we're going to the right, all right, we can see we would take off for this jump thinking we're going straight or to the left and then getting that rear cross on the flat. So you have some pros and cons over the rear cross on the flat. Strategically, where we got in trouble on this one is doing it a bit too deep. So if we look at the lines that the dogs need to take, these two jumps are kind of in a straight line. So as a handler, you need to make sure that as the dog is approaching this jump, the line of motion parallels that. So dogs naturally run parallel to us. Because Katie was so far ahead, she got deep up here. So when she had to rear cross, all right, so she's coming down around here. As she had to rear cross and cut back in this way to get around the jump. So if you can see that red line, right, so kind of coming up, rear cross, and then cut around the wing, this pulled to the right to come around the wing is then what caused Ollie to say, oh, you're moving to the right. Let me come to the right with you. All right. So that little bit of pull in here combined with the fact that being behind the dog is a turning cue. All right. So when we take in just natural cues with regard to location, being behind the dog is a turning cue. So Ollie said, oh, motion to the right. You're falling behind. We must be turning. So he prepared to bend in. You can actually see at this point his line's already starting to come in. And this is where now we try to do the Hail Mary to save it. We throw up the outside arm. We're trying to save it and say, you know, no, kick out to that jump. But it just wasn't enough. Now, I don't know Ollie's age level here, but I do think depending on the dog's experience level, a lot of dogs would redirect out to this jump, but it would kind of be that. It would be a redirect. They would realize, oh, we're not turning. They turn back onto the left and find that jump on the verbal and kind of the outside arm. In this case, Ollie just wasn't able to do it on time and ended up with the refusal. Okay, so if you're planning to do a rear cross on the flat, the goal is to meet the dog at the point of the rear cross at the same time as the dog. You can see here Katie was really far ahead, and that then caused her to go too deep and then change the line of motion. So dogs naturally run parallel to us. We want to try to parallel the desired path. Now that we've talked a little bit about the execution of that rear cross on the flat, now I want to come back through this run and talk a little bit about the strategy. And not just on that rear cross, because as I already mentioned, there are quite a few cons with the rear on the flat, and I do believe that you should try to avoid them if you can. There's maybe going to be some scenarios or potentially a few scenarios, particularly with lower level classes, where you need to do a rear on the flat. But if you can avoid it, and I think it was avoidable on this run, I would avoid it. All right, so we're going to start here at the beginning, because the first thing that I would change is I would try to do the cross between the tunnel and the jump instead of the the blind cross on the landing of 2. All right, so we get that good send into the tunnel. It would have been very easy to cut right over here and pick Ollie up on the right and already have dog on right for the tunnel. The reason that I say that is really twofold. One, we can get an earlier lead change. But the second thing is now we're minimizing the things that are happening at the jump, the chaos at the jump, the side change, the taking the eyes off the dog, which now minimizes the risk of something going wrong. When a dog goes into the tunnel, they're on a fixed path. So any cross, any side change, anything I can do while they're in the tunnel, they're on a fixed path. They can't knock a bar in a tunnel. They can't go off course in a tunnel. They can't turn right when you want them to go left in a tunnel. So if I can do a cross while the dog's in the tunnel, it's going to be much safer. But you can see here in terms of the lead change, all right, Ollie comes out on the right lead, on the right lead, all right, on the right lead. So at this point, Ollie is still on the right lead. If Katie had been over here, Ollie would have already been on the left lead, because as soon as he came out of the tunnel, Katie would have been on Ollie's left. So that's where I say that earlier lead change. So again, reason number one, I would look at changing the strategy is to avoid things happening here. All right, you can see what's going to happen is the blind cross. So again, chance of things going wrong. We have the taking the eyes off the dog, all right, that late lead change. But the other reason is that earlier lead change. Now you can see that little skip right there. I'm going to kind of put it in slow-mo if I can. All right there, that little skip, that was the lead change happening. All right, so stride, skip, and then jump. That would have happened right immediately at the exit of the tunnel, which then means less risk of things going wrong at the jump. So that would have been the one thing that I would have changed strategically. Now, this was all good, but notice Katie's ahead of Ollie. For this entire run, Katie's ahead of Ollie. So instead of choosing to do a rear, and it was a rear that she ended up too far ahead on, I would have gone in for the blind. So at this point, I would have cut right across here on this line, let Ollie come around. Katie would have been on the other side, and then now picked up Ollie on the left. All right, so there's plenty of a head start, plenty of ascent. And also, not only are we going to then eliminate the need for the rear cross on the flat, but remember earlier when I said Ollie was looking at the off course? I mean, watch this line. He goes on. It looks like he's going to the red. Now, handler would be between dog and off course. All right, so now handler's over here. Dog comes up on this side. Handler runs this line, and off we go. So given that far ahead, I would have done a blind, and it would have been a blind with this dog on number 9, not a front, but it depends on the dog. A larger dog, I might have been more inclined to do the front to provide more turning cues. And now we have dog on left. We eliminate getting too far ahead. We eliminate the refusal, and now I would finish off the run with the same strategy, all right, of going down, jump, weave, pulls, dog on left, a front cross at the end of the weaves, and I would do a front here instead of a blind because of the degree of turn. You can see it's weave pulls down here and jump cut back that way, pretty tight turn. So the front cross makes the most sense to finish dog on right. So I would finish off this sequence or this course the same, but I would have made those strategic changes in the beginning. So again, crossing after the tunnel instead of after 2, and then doing the blind cross after 9 rather than the rear cross on the flat after 10. So again, lots of great things about the course. I just thought that this run presented us the opportunity to talk about strategy and execution. And I think sometimes people will misevaluate things. So they think something was a bad choice. So I hear people say, man, I knew I shouldn't have done that front cross. I should have done the rear. I don't know why I did the front. In reality, it wasn't the front that was the problem. It was the execution of the front. It wasn't that you did the front. It was that you did the front poorly. So that's where you got to ask yourself, okay, was it an execution issue or was it a strategy issue? Did I do it poorly and I needed to do it better, or did I choose wrong so that truly I wasn't far enough ahead for the front and I should have done the rear instead of the front? So this course gave us a chance to look at both of those, and I think that's an important aspect in analyzing runs to try to determine execution versus strategy errors.
All right. So lots of good feedback here. So Katie is watching. She
Yay.
says that this is her pup.
It
We
was
aren't a polished
great
team.
video, Katie. You had lots of brilliant stuff in there, and it was a good chance for you to learn, but also for everybody else to learn from it. So thank you for submitting it.
Yep. And then we have, talking about execution and strategy. And we're going to be talking about both of those things next week. We're going to have a webinar series. If you listen to the podcast, we talked about that as well. So that is going to be coming up over the next couple of weeks. So more on these ideas of execution and strategy. Gwen says, this is fabulous. Great feedback. So any questions about either of the first 2 runs, feel free to go ahead and put them in. I I did not realize how similar those sequences were. That rear cross, that first rear cross, or the rear cross where your handler made the error, and the first rear cross on mine were almost identical in terms of the spacing and the one jump coming into it and the off course jump. And so I think that also highlights something else that I think is super important to realize in agility, is how many patterns get repeated in the sport in general. And so there is so much that you can learn, both from your own time in the ring and in trials, and looking at your own videos and figuring out what went wrong, because you might get something very similar, not too much later. And then also, watching other people's runs, like these patterns repeat themselves. Okay, let's see. She said, you mentioned front versus blind to give more turning cues. Is this kind of a rule of thumb on why you would pick one over the other?
Yes and no. The front is going to give more turning cues than an extension blind. So there's different types of blind crosses. The blind cross that would have been done in this case was a blind where you're rotating away from the dog. So it's an extension blind. And it's called an extension blind because there's no turning cues. It's cueing extension. So it worked out for Ollie given his size and the fact that jump number 9 didn't require much of a turn. But if I was running a larger dog, I potentially would have done a front there and rotated towards the dog because of what was, I don't know the number, the off course there that was after number 8. So the risk that as I ran into the blind, the rotation away, I kind of want to walk through it. This is like my shadow handling. Like this is my 3D moment of turning back over the left, but moving right may cause the dog. So yes and no, meaning yes, as a general rule of thumb, a front's going to provide more turning cues and a blind is going to be more extension cues. But in this particular scenario, the decision was made based on the size of the dog and how many turning cues versus forward cues that dog needed. So I did some before and after at AKC Nationals, and there was a course where with the 12-inch dogs, I did a blind, but the 20-inch dogs, I did a front because they could jump in more extension and still grab the next jump and still be on the correct line. But if I had cued the big dogs in extension, their line would have been offset for the next jump. So I did a front to get more of a turn.
Yeah. And I thought the other really interesting thing about your video was that you could see that she was so far ahead that she probably could make that blind. So a lot of times when we're looking at video, would be like, maybe you could put a blind here, maybe not. But there, because she ran so hard, you're like, yeah, you were gonna get there.
Yeah. She was funny, fast, and athletic enough. I mean, even the little revving up at the start line and just taking off kind of showed that she had the speed and athleticism to get up there and stay ahead.
Yep. All right, so now we have Esteban looking at this video, and this is Morgan.
Okay, so the handler's Morgan, and do you have a dog's name?
Wabi Sabi.
Wabi Sabi. Okay, so Wabi Sabi is an Aussie, and we picked this run as a pretty interesting run, but we picked it because I believe this run is clean. Like it's really good. The dog looks great. The handling looks great, and we wanted to make the point that video analysis isn't just about picking out the things you didn't do well and that you need to fix. You need to make sure you have a very good understanding of what you're doing well so you can keep doing that, because a lot of times people will do things very, very well and have no idea they're doing it very well. And then at some point in their trialing and in their training, they might even lose it because they don't realize what they're doing so well, what's really working for them. And even though they did do things well, there are a couple of interesting things that I wanted to pull up here. So let me zoom in here. Oh, very cool. Okay. All right. So she opens with the dog here. They're going to hit the weave poles. Oh, it's going to pull back.
I don't know if you want to, Sarah, but when I did my feedback, you made the screen bigger.
Oh, yeah, I'll do that now.
I was going to say, I noticed a difference. So I don't know if people did, but yeah, that makes it a little easier to see. Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Give it a shot. Okay. On form is always a little bit touchy to me. So first thing I want to do is see here. Well, first thing I should have done was change all the arrows to how I like them. So all of us like to use the app software a little bit differently.
Jen had this problem at NAC because I would hand her my iPad to do her before and after analyses, and she's like, "All your arrows are different."
Yeah,
I'm with you. That's when I like my certain logos or certain icons in certain colors and in certain folders. I get it.
Exactly. So let me do that very quickly. So one thing we can do here with on form that we also could do with Coach's Eye is get times. And so what I like to do is get the dog's nose. Here the angles, it's a little tough to see. So there's going to be a little bit of guesswork here. But right where the nose is breaking the plane of the first pole, and then right where the dog's nose will break the plane of the final pole, and that can kind of give you an idea of how fast the dog is going. Here, though, sometimes the clock is not great. So I have had issues with the clock where it jumps forward.
There we go. That looks good.
Does that look better?
Mhm.
Because there's no way the dog was doing it in 6 seconds. So it's coming in at about 3.3. And so after you've done a couple of weave poles, you gotten times on a couple of weave poles, you'll notice things. So for example, most dogs will weave a little bit faster on turf than they will on dirt. Generally, they're a little bit better on grass than on dirt. And through video analysis, we ended up discovering little things like you don't necessarily need to swim. That is one step to have really, really fast weave poles so that you could absolutely hop. Because once upon a time, before we had video analysis, we used to think if your dog was hopping, your dog could go faster, especially if they were medium size or a large dog. So I think that's pretty interesting. The opening otherwise, though, is pretty straightforward. I think the handler does a nice job here getting the dog to the table. And you can see that the handler is slowing down here. So this is the first spot I thought that was interesting. So when we take a look at this handler, you can see that there's a change, right? The handler was running. Now they're slowing down. You can see as they approach the turn, there's really a big drop in speed. That's exactly what we want in order to create a turn here at this jump. But then I feel like you can see the dog kind of take their time and dribble into the table a little bit before hopping on the table. And you can see the handler kind of walk toward the table as well. So that's one thing where having never seen this dog, this is the first time I've ever seen this dog run in this handler handle. Like I might ask a follow-up question about the table. You know, does the dog like the table? Have there been issues around the table? How are we handling the table? Because I feel like the dog, based on how the dog ran everywhere else on this course, could run probably a little bit faster to the table. And I think the one piece of advice I would give handlers who have issues with the table is often it's being under reinforced in training. So you probably need to randomize some reinforcement in there, some really good stuff, the same way you would for completing tough weave poles and contacts, right? And even start lines. So I think a lot of people really neglect rewarding the table. And the second thing is that you want to treat the table like a jump. So that's a quick point that I wanted to make. So instead of the table, imagine instead here a jump. So now we're kind of looking at this from above. Here comes the dog's path in yellow. And as the handler, I'm going to pull the dog here. And if this were a jump and I needed to get the dog over this jump, we would never stop, slow down, and then run to the jump, right? That would almost crowd the dog. That might even push the dog off of that jump. And certainly the dog would slow down if we walked toward that jump. And so what I would suggest is, as we're coming around here, that we want to treat that table like a jump. And Jennifer made the point that dogs parallel our own lines. So rather than me heading to the table to meet the dog there on either the takeoff side of the table or the landing side of the table, that I really want to parallel that table to get the dog on the table as fast as I possibly can. So hopefully that makes sense. I think too many handlers kind of meet their dog at the table and they're a little too casual. Now, if your dog has issues with coming in very hot, like a rocket, and sliding off the table and having issues sticking the landing on the table, it's a completely different situation. But the table is one area that I think people kind of undertrain and they don't really think about when they're handling. And so this is something that kind of jumped out to me because it was different from how the dog runs on the rest of the course, which you're about to see here. Okay, the handler's going to blind while the dog is in the tunnel. And here we get a very nice teeter. And I want to zoom in here. and show you how the handler gets the side change. So the handler wants to get to the other side, and you have a couple of choices. The handler can rear before the teeter, or if you're going to do it after the teeter, you can blind or you can front. And here you see that the handler is going to opt for the front. Now, by the time the dog is down on the ground with the teeter, the handler is pretty much done. You'll notice, though, that the handler is still very close to the teeter and very much in the space where the dog wants to jump onto. And this is a little too close, and this is why most people should be blind crossing the end of teeters. So I think this is a point of emphasis for me on all three contacts, and it's a little bit harder on the dog walk because of the nature of the dog walk. So the dog walk, you are very rarely
That far ahead.
yeah, so far ahead where you're going to be crossing at the end of that contact. But with the A-frame and especially the teeter, there are many, many opportunities for handlers to cross at the end of the obstacle. And almost no one blind crosses, right? It's a scary thing for handlers to do psychologically. You're taking your eyes off your dog at a moment when you feel like staring them down may keep them on the teeter. And here you can see that the dog is starting to leave the board. Right here, the front feet are in the air and the board is not yet on the ground. And so in slow motion, this looks like a legal teeter, and I would not have called it as a judge either in real time. But for me, seeing the handler opt for the front cross, which is going to keep the handler closer to the teeter and let the handler look at the dog, makes me think, does this dog have fly-off issues, right? Is this an area that we can improve? Because I would certainly like to get this handler further ahead, further downstream. Okay, now here it's not too big a deal because the handler is rewarded with a tunnel as a target that the handler is able to send to, right? So there's no damage done here for the handler being a little bit trapped at the teeter. Now we will see, especially at big events, even national level events in finals or challenger rounds, where judges will absolutely punish handlers who have to babysit weave pole exits and teeter exits. And so this is why across the board, regardless of the level, unless they're like very, very beginner or the dog has very different issues. But if you're going to be competitive, I'm looking at your video and I'm working with you, like I'm coaching you one-on-one. One of the things I'm pushing everyone to is to blind cross at the end of teeters. So I think just becoming comfortable with that, the dogs adjust to it very, very quickly. Same thing on the A-frame. And I point that out because you're going to see a beautiful blind cross from this handler after the A-frame later on in this run. Okay, but here, no real issues. I don't think we have quite the right angle to get the time on the dog walk. So when I'm timing dog walks or A-frames, I go first foot on. So there's a little bit of guesswork. So this can be off a couple of hundredths of a second. But we're going to give it a shot to when the dog leaves. So the dog is probably leaving about here. So this A-frame, I would call in the 1.8, 1.9 range.
Dog walk.
I'm sorry, dog walk. Yes, thank you. Which is very good. Okay, and then we're just coming around a loop here. And we're going to see that the dog needs to come this way, not this way. And so I think a lot of people would really hesitate to do a blind cross here. And I want to show you really good execution. When should we be blind crossing on contacts? And I think the answer is pretty much as soon as possible, right? And I think too many people wait until the dog is in the yellow because they have a very, I don't know that obsessive is the right word. They have a strong desire to look the dog all the way down into contact, as we saw this handler do with the front cross at the end of the teeter. But here you see that the handler is already providing the proper, very strong, proper blind cross cues here, which is basically looking over the shoulder with the head, looking back at the dog over the left shoulder. So the dog knows instantly that they are going to the handler's left side and the left arm extended. And bonus, the right arm is not flapping around so that there's any question for the dog. Oh, maybe I should be going to the right. Maybe we're going to this jump. And in fact, if I take this A-frame and I cut it right in half, everybody, you tell me which side the dog is on, right? So that if the dog had a suspicion they were going down this way, they would be rolling right down the middle or maybe even on this side, right? But we see the dog is already shortening the distance here to take the best possible line over the A-frame. Look at what the dog sees as they come over the apex. Here, the dog's head is now over. They can see the handler. Check the handler's head. Check the handler's arms, shoulders. Everything says this is a blind cross. Come to my left side, and now the dog has options. Am I going to go down this way, or this way? And you see the dog absolutely with a beautiful response, getting down into the yellow. No hesitation. Never looks at the off-course wingless jump, which is just staring the dog in the face. And we have a beautiful finish. So when I see that the handler is able to do that with the A-frame, with good timing, I say, okay, I think this is something that we want to work on with the teeter. If the dog is flying off, that's an issue we want to address. But I want to get the same advantage here. I want to get it on the teeter as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really loved that blind cross at the A-frame. Like, I just wanted to emphasize that was literally picture perfect. Like, that is what everybody should be striving for if they're going to blind cross that obstacle. Oh.
The handler commented.
Where?
Gwendolyn.
Oh,
point. Yeah.
This one?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Yes, that's not this handler though.
Oh, it's not?
No, this handler is Morgan.
Oh yeah, you're right. Okay, my mistake. My mistake.
Very good.
I assumed that the handler was talking about what she was doing. Okay, yes.
All right.
Thank
Sue
you.
said she just started doing blinds after teeters and love it. And it helps him to go through. Yeah, I think I think the other interesting thing about the teeter specifically is it is very rare to see a significant turn after the teeter in terms of course design.
Mhm.
And so most of the time, like the blind, all things being equal, the blind is what you should do because there really isn't a turn. It's just a side change. And if you can do that side change while the dog is engaged with an obstacle, then it's not really affecting the lines.
Yeah, I think of this as kind of a remnant of old style training. The teeter's kind of the last frontier to conquer. It's the space of dog agility. Jen, do you remember the days when dogs would come over the A-frame and then handlers would literally stand at the bottom and try and like block the dog from like jumping over the yellow? I remember that. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's basically what you're doing.
Agility a long time ago. I remember a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically that's still happening today. Yeah. At every trial you go to with the teeter.
Right.
I mean,
right.
I will admit that
yeah.
in big events, I'm guilty. I mean, at AKC Nationals, it should have been a blind after the teeter. And I fronted because I thought the turning towards her puts the pressure on, helps to slide back onto the rear. It was definitely a handling choice made to compensate for lack of training. But I own it. I know it. And I think that's what's important. And I hopefully, that's what people got from what you were saying is like, you should be able to blind.
Yeah.
Right.
And
absolutely.
If you can't blind, it's probably a weakness in your teeter.
Right.
Exactly.
And I did, and again, I want to emphasize the point. This run was great. Right. Yeah. And she absolutely did not need to be further ahead. She could front cross there. And let's say this is the second run and she's going for a double Q. She needs that double Q to qualify for nationals or some other event. I think that might be a very, very sound strategy.
What you got to do.
but there are going to be times, especially as you climb the ranks and get up to the higher levels and bigger competitions in agility, where you are definitely going to be a little bit ahead on the teeter. And even if you can't be too much further ahead, the momentum loss when you execute a front turn is real as a human.
Yeah.
And blind crosses really let you maintain almost the entirety of your momentum and speed as a handler.
Right.
So.
And I think then seeing what a beautiful blind cross she did at the A-frame kind of highlighted well, if you have that skill and you do, like, let's apply it to other places as well. Right. And the other thing that you had talked about people like to really see their dog do things. Sometimes they're uncomfortable with the blind cross. And I see this a lot, even when people do blinds, they do them really late because they want to see their dog do the thing and then they'd want to do the blind.
Right.
And my advice is always it should be so early that you still can see your dog do the thing. You just see them over the new shoulder. So if
Right.
you watched her there, she could see her dog hit the yellow because she was already completely done with the blind at that point.
Right.
And on the teeter, like ideally you would have raced off in front and then you'd be reaching back on the new arm before the teeter has even fallen. So by doing it even earlier, you can still have that sense of connection, even when you're doing the blind.
Yeah, because what's unique about the contacts, blinding when your dog's on the contacts or the weave poles, is they are essentially trapped by that obstacle, right? If your dog is taking a series of jumps and you blind too early, a dog can peel off a jump, certainly, depending on the angle and all that, right? But they can't come off the A-frame or the teeter. They're going to complete the obstacle, right? So you can almost never be too early on those obstacles.
Absolutely. All right, this is a great question, and then we're probably going to wrap up here. And actually, Elise, I want you to send an email to team@baddogagility.com because I'm going to give you the short version, but then I have a couple of podcasts that I want to send to you and other live trainings that we've done. But basically, she asks, when you're planning your strategy, do you have options in mind? For example, if I'm ahead, I'll do a front, but if I'm behind, I'll do a rear. Or do you plan whether you're going to be ahead or behind before so you're not adjusting on the fly? So multi-part answer here. So the first thing is I will never have 3 plan A's. I will always have a plan A and a plan B. I don't mind when people walk options just in case they're not where they think they're going to be, but you have to have a single plan A in your mind out there. You can't go out there kind of running in the middle and then just making the decision on the fly. Have a plan and only deviate if something happened where that plan isn't going to work anymore. Secondly, you can't just throw in a rear when you don't make the front, because as we saw actually on Jen's analysis was a great one. You cannot just throw in a rear without any sort of preparation at first. You need to let the dog get ahead of you. So when you are too far ahead, yes, you might be stuck doing a rear, but it's not going to be a good rear. A good rear is set up several jumps before the actual rear cross happens. Okay, hold on. I clicked the button. There we go. So you can't just throw in a rear just because you happen to be, or you can't just, change a front to a rear. You really have to have planned that out. And then thirdly, how do you know, how do you plan whether you're going to be ahead or behind? Well, that takes practice. The practice of walking courses, the practice of running, this review like this will show you, looking at this video, like if Katie looks at that video, the same video that Jen did, she looks at it and she says, I see that I had time to do a blind there, right? I probably could have gotten there. And now she knows next time she's in a similar situation that to maybe push for that. So when you do your video review often enough, you start to build even faster your internal clock of where you are going to be relative to your dog. All right.
All right. Last comment, I think. Sue says she started doing blinds after teeters and loves it. Dog has a slight hesitation on the teeter. This is really helping him continue through the contact very smoothly and has sped up his performance on the teeter. I think a lot of people were really nervous about it when I said, hey, try it. And when they did it, they're like, ooh, that's nice.
Yeah.
And so it's really not as much work as you think it's going to be for most people. And if it uncovers a problem like early fly-offs, you probably needed to be working on that issue anyway.
That's right. All right. Any parting words, Jennifer or Esteban, before we wrap up? And if anybody has one last question, but I believe that we've answered the questions here. Picked 3 good runs for you. I love highlighting what goes well on a run. So
yeah, I was gonna say, I think we had good submissions, and then these 3 handlers did a great job putting them in, and we had good variety, but also good overlap. And yeah, pointing out not just what you did wrong, right? A lot of times the faulted runs, you watch them once, you take away what you need to take, and then you delete it. And it's the good runs that you want to watch over and over and over again, because that's what you want your subconscious seeing, is how to do it right.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so they said off topic, not really off topic, it's actually quite on topic. What tool are you using to draw and measure times? So we use something called OnForm, OnForm. It's an iOS app, and it lets you scroll through, draw on the screen, and time things. So you can look up that app. All right. Well, thank you everybody who was able to join us live. If you're catching the replay, no problem at all. Thanks for watching. And if you found this helpful, you can share it. And keep an eye on our Facebook page and in your email for details on the webinar series that we are going to start next week. Next Tuesday night, same time, 7 p.m. will be the first webinar. And those details will go out soon. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night.